All right, welcome to our 4 o'clock session of NNP Symposium. We have Eric Shenna with us, who's going to be talking about the Ingle system of Dayton, Ohio, and the birth of system Scrip. Eric is a longtime author and researcher in the field of tokens, and currently has a column with Dave Schenkman in the Central States Sentinel publication. And by way of introduction, the Ingle System Company of Dayton, Ohio, was the first such firm to produce a system of copyrighted tokens using a standardized format and even a specialized dispenser. While in operation only from around 1908 to 1919, the Ingle system Scrip became very popular, especially in the lumber and coal mining industries, setting the stage for a revolution in company store Scrip that lasted for decades. All right. So with that, Eric, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Len. My name is, like you said, my name is Eric Shenna, and I'm from Winchester, Virginia, and I am going to be talking to you today about something that's near and dear to my heart, the Ingle System Company of Dayton, Ohio. Now, let's go here. Now, tokens at the turn of the 20th century is really where the story starts. Tokens as such have a very long history in the United States. After the Civil War, the tokens were primarily used for two main reasons. One is advertisements. They were often called store cards, or as monetary substitutes, frequently called at the time trade checks or due bills, or simply checks. Though they had other nicknames like bingles and clackers and similar tinnies, things like that. And it is this type of token that we're going to be focusing on today. They were used to facilitate trade in several different manners, and were often used in more remote or rural locations where access to a regular monetary supply was not guaranteed. Travel in the more remote parts of the country to a major banking town was not necessarily an easy venture to do as it is today. And by the late 19th century, there were thousands of businesses throughout the country that used tokens, and most notably among them are general stores, dry goods, groceries, canneries, farms, saloons, bars, pool halls, and for later on in this talk, importantly, mining and lumber companies. Each store had a different use for their tokens. Some of them were used to extend credit to local farmers and other customers. A farmer would come in with maybe 12 dozen eggs and sell them to the general merchant, who would then issue tokens as payment. And then the farmer would come back to the merchant and buy goods there. That was a very frequent use for these things. Another use was by farms and canneries, where they were used to pay for piecework. Say you can or pick a certain number of fruits, vegetables, or seafood, you'd be paid a certain amount, given a bushel or a peck or something to that effect. And then when payday would come around, you would turn those checks in to get paid in proper money. Factories and mills also started to use them, but they did it in a slightly different manner. They used them almost like a payday loan. An employee, if they needed an advance on their paycheck, they would get paid in tokens that they would have to use at their own company associated store. That became much more formalized, especially in the coal industry, where it is best known there. And what I did here is I want to show you 4 examples of some of these checks and due bills. The first one on the left here is in the upper left is from J.W. McQuay in Connickville, which is in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. It specifically says due bill, which is a neat inclusion on the token, and he ran a very small general store there. The skinning check to the right of it is from the cannery of Blakemore and Norris in Port Royal, Virginia. Those were used to pay for people who peeled tomatoes and similar fruits and vegetables there. It's just kind of neat that it says skinning check. down the bottom left is a paycheck token from the William C. Graken Glove Company in my town of Winchester. And this one was good for 5 cents. And finally, at the bottom right is a favorite of mine. This comes from the W.C. Whitaker and Sons General Store in Whitaker, Virginia, outside of Winchester. These are cardboard tokens that were used roughly around the turn of the century for a good 30 years by the Whitaker family. And they were produced using prepared cardboard blanks that they ordered from Cussons, May and Shepherd in Glen Allen, Virginia, who made this style of token for decades and decades. They were so big that they even had their own zip code and post office and a special postmark in the late 19th century. Now, tokens themselves had advantages, but they also had some disadvantages. And the main thing that those, despite being as useful as they are, their main challenges that they had were the fact that they could be counterfeited pretty much with impunity, as they were not necessarily protected by patent, copyright, or trademark laws, and were often reliant on the due diligence of the token manufacturers to protect their product line and their reputation. Some were better than others in that regard. In addition, for those businesses that didn't necessarily use tokens, but instead relied on quite often very complicated bookkeeping systems or even paper chits to keep track of payday loans or credit, those things could be very easily forged or altered, or even abused by employees themselves. So creating a standardized set of tokens and designs offered a chance to help with these challenges. One early attempt was the early slug plate tokens from the 1880s, offered by companies such as the famous sporting goods manufacturer, Brunswick, Balk and Collender. They sold billiard supplies to pool halls and saloons. And among those supplies included these tokens. They all had a standard design, but the name of the merchant would be on what they call a slug plate that would be inserted on the center of the obverse of the token, and then they could reuse the outside of the token die for those. They're very familiar to collectors of Western tokens, since saloons and bars and pool halls were their biggest customers, and those were the biggest users of tokens in the late 19th and early 20th century. Now, another early attempt are the tokens that you see here, that I have illustrated here, and that is the A.W. Hanmer's method of soliciting trade tokens for business firms. He had an idea that these could be used. They would be copyrighted, as you can see by the big word copyrighted on the reverse of this $1 specimen. But for some reason, they don't seem to have taken off. He did advertise heavily in Richmond, Virginia newspapers, but so far as I am aware, no token has been found with the name of a business other than Hanmer's on it that used this system. So they kind of went the way of the dodo in that regard. Now, this brings us to Dayton, Ohio, and the Ingle brothers. Brothers David E., Edwin H., and Wesley Ingle ran a grocery store at 1118 East 5th Street in downtown Dayton. And they kept on that grocery store for a while. In the course of their daily business, the Ingle brothers used a credit system for the convenience of their customers, like many other grocery stores and general stores did, and even used standard trade tokens like the one that you see here in the upper left-hand corner. That is from the Ingle brothers grocery store. However, brother Edwin found that this system was overly cumbersome for their use. And so he came up with this concept of using copyrighted brass store checks that could be dispensed from a specially designed register that would keep an accurate accounting of how many tokens left the register and came back into the store. And what they started doing, and what Edwin started doing, was experimenting with various different types of tokens. Here is a sample, a sales sample. It just says Ingle Brothers sample. And these tokens would be very utilitarian in design. They would just have the name of the issuing merchant, the denomination, and copyrighted on them. They would use these tokens they would use these sample tokens to advertise their wares to prospective customers, mostly in the initially in their local area. And in fact, they used advertising and sales agents such as Whitaker and Company, also in Dayton. They produced their own advertising check that's illustrated down here, good for $1, but it is just a sample. And it advertised not only the Ingle Brothers check credit system, but also Whitaker and Company services. Now, the very first line of tokens that the Ingle Brothers produced are the so-called copyright or copyrighted tokens. After they decided to go into the token making business, they set up a shop in a disused blacksmith shop just one block over at 1204 East 5th Street. And then they came up with their initial series of tokens, these that you see here. As I mentioned before, they are no frills. They're not going to win any design awards, that's for sure. It's the denomination and the word copyright or copyrighted and the name of the merchant. And oftentimes they didn't even put the name of the town. Most often they didn't put even the name of the town where the merchant was. It was presumed that these tokens would not be leaving the town that they were used, and so they wouldn't need to do that. Because they were so earlier token scholars who thought that they were actually experimental pieces, but these tokens have actually been found by several, have been used with several different merchants across several different states. Ohio, of course, like the C.E. Smith and Company one from Columbus, and even as far afield as Virginia. There was a butcher shop in Roanoke that issued copyrighted tokens, and then this one in West Virginia, A.S. Russell in Hawk's Nest. Now, they didn't use these tokens for very long. They started striking them roughly in the middle of 1908, and then by June of 1909, they decided to incorporate under a different name other than Ingle Brothers and produce a different design. And in 1909, David and Edwin Ingle formed the Ingle System Company. Now, after those copyrighted pieces and a few other experimental pieces, they started making what are known as the 1909 patent ones. At their facility at 1204 East 5th Street, they used an old blacksmith's drop hammer press. It would be the die would be attached to a large heavy cylinder and then dropped almost like a pile driver. And that's how they struck these pieces. Drop hammer presses have been used frequently for tokens, but they have a long history. And as a matter of fact, the Russian mint in the 18th century, those large, if you're familiar with them, large 5 kopeck copper pieces under Catherine the Great were struck using a drop hammer press that was repurposed from an armory. So this was a commonly found piece of equipment that Ingle could use for their purposes. Now, they had gotten enough orders by 1912 that they had to move their factory. And so they moved it to Reading, Ohio, to a much larger building that happened to have been owned by the company's treasurer, a man by the name of Joseph Brinkman. And after 1912, all the tokens from the Ingle system were produced at the Reading facility rather than in Dayton, though the headquarters remained back in Dayton. And they produced a few oddities. Most notably these two odd pieces from Cincinnati. They were both issued by a saloon keeper by the name of Andrew Oker. On the other side, it just has the letters AO and then 5. However, One says Dayton and the other one says Reading. And as far as I'm aware, this is the only use of the Reading, Ohio location on any Ingle script. Even well after the facilities had moved to Reading, the would say Dayton, and even the script itself, if you ordered the script, the wrapper would say Dayton, Ohio. This is a rather unusual unopened wrap of 1 cent tokens from the 1914 pattern issued by a general store in Ronaldo, Kentucky. Now, one of the big selling points of the Ingle system was the Ingle system register. They weren't overly huge. They're fairly small. As a matter of fact, I have this 2-drawer one is right next to me right here. And I'll get into this thing in a little bit. They're very small, pretty compact, and they were made, they were first patented in 1909 and then later revised in 1911. And they had a couple of different models of them. They were made out of wood with metal tubes on the inside where the tokens could be ejected, and also slots up at the top here where you put them back when they came back to the store. Later models and fancier models had a little bell in it, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then at the very top is this big metal fancy flag that says Ingle System, Dayton, Ohio, and then patent June 1909 and 1911. And it is this flag that's rather important when it comes to these registers. These are very rare. There's not a lot of them around. They only come up once every couple of years mostly. And some of them, this flag was removed in a lot of cases because it really served no function other than to advertise that it was Ingle. And some of them were knocked off or got broken and that type of thing. So that's a rather important component of this register. Now, the registers themselves are not marked with a maker's mark. However, the construction itself seems to strongly suggest that they were produced by the National Cash Register Company that also happened to be located in Dayton. National Cash Register currently is called NCR, still in business, and they made big ornate cash registers and all the way down to simple ones. And it would just make sense that a company that was focused primarily on token manufacturers manufacturing would subcontract their register ideas and construction to a major powerhouse like NCR. Now, there were 3 basic models of these things. This was the smallest and the simplest of them. It's a small 2-drawer model known as the Model 32, held about 900 tokens. There's a later 3-drawer token that has 2 drawers up at the top and then 1 large one at the bottom. That holds about 1,900 tokens. And then there's also a Model 34, which is a 4-drawer token machine, and it has just 4 drawers instead of 3. It too holds about 1,900 tokens. And the funny thing about Ingle is they were an one-stop shop when it came to this type of thing. Not only could you buy the registers and their tokens, but you could also buy things like payroll deduction forms and other receipts. That's kind of hard to see here, but we'll talk about these in a second. This particular register that I have here was used in a general store in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, in a place called Clover Lick. And it was associated to a lumber camp that was located there. This was used by a gentleman by the name of W.H. Young. I got this register in Orange, Virginia, which is not far from Charlottesville. And it was stuffed chock full of these Ingle receipts, bank checks from nearby Marlinton, West Virginia, and even a completed payroll deduction form showing that this particular business used them as for payroll advances. Now, here are some images of the patent documents. The one on the left here is for the original 1909 patent. And then these are the revised patents from 1914 of the 1911 design. And this one shows the mechanism inside the machine itself and how the slides work and all that. Now, these things had a little, some of them, the later versions had a little bell on them that would ring anytime a token was dispensed or went in. And that was to serve as a theft deterrent, to allow the shop owner to know anytime that the machine was used, so their employees weren't palming tokens or anything like that, or giving them out for friends, things like that. So it was a way to protect the owner. Now here is one of the more deluxe models. If you had a little bit more money, you could order the same registers, but this time with marble accents and even chrome plating on the metal pieces. This 3-drawer register was ordered by C.P. Bruce of Canton, Ohio. And my understanding is when it was found, it was chock full of those tokens. Now, the Young register was very interesting because not only amongst those receipts were stuffed in there, but he also saved 2 things that are invaluable for researchers. And the first and foremost is this thing, which is a price list. This is a price list of the supplies that you could order from the Ingle company. It's from it's a 1916 one that the Ingle system mailed out, and you could buy legal forms, sales forms, memoranda. You could even order the register if you needed it, or refills on the patented metal trade coins, and it had sets. You can even order a complete system, the register, 1,900 pieces of script with your name on it, and all the necessary forms, and even an instruction sheet. And as far as I know, there are not too many of these documents around, and this may actually be the only one. Interestingly enough, he also happened to have had a catalog price list and return envelope from the Dayton Stencil Company. And I'm going to talk about them in a little bit because they also played a rather important role in tokens. Now, 1909, Ingle revised their design. They now use the phrase Ingle system on their tokens, and they also included the patent date and the merchant name and a couple of other little subtle things, but these were still pretty utilitarian looking pieces. The typical Ingle token from the 1909 patent looks something like this piece from Scrimgeour Brothers in Bellington, West Virginia. And the other denominations are not that far off from that. And as with the earlier copyrighted pieces, Ingle also produced some sales samples. And this is a sales sample 1 cent piece that they used. Now, one of the innovations that Edwin figured would be rather useful in distinguishing one token from another, if you have similar merchants, was the use of a letter or a symbol in a geometric shape. And here's a selection of them right here. B, H, J, L, things like that, even a Star of David, a flower, and even a delta sign. And some of them even have little things like a running rabbit on them. Now, when merchants ordered their tokens, most of them ordered the standard denominations from 1 cent to $1, but there were a few that went a little bit outside of the norm, and here are some examples of that. The token up in the upper left is probably the most boring of the more interesting pieces, if for what it's worth. This is a $5 token from a grocery store in Richmond, Virginia. And Cosby and Company felt that not only from the 1 cent to the $1 was needed, but they needed some higher denominations, and they even ordered some $5 pieces. Now, the token to the right of it from Ignatz and Frasch in Nashville, Tennessee, is very unusual indeed because it is not denominated in cents, but rather in pounds of ice. The way they designed this only the obverse would actually say pounds of ice. They could use a standard 25-cent reverse die. Now, the the West Nashville Coal and Ice Company, also in Nashville, was different altogether. They ordered a 12.5-pound token. Didn't specify pounds of what, though I suspected it was for either coal or ice, depending on what they wanted to use. But 12.5 is an unusual denomination for Ingle. This one is one of the rarer pieces. Even though these tokens are very utilitarian and straightforward in design, every once in a while you get some where it appears the die sinker had a very bad day. This J.W. Taylor token from Huntington, West Virginia is a perfect example of that. Notice that the obverse is pretty straightforward. It's just the name and the denomination 50 and a little symbol at the bottom. But the reverse is, well, it's a bit of a mess. The layout is all kinds of skewed. In trade is not aligned with anything. The numerals 50 are tilted to the side. The letters are not lined up. And incredibly, the T in the word system is upside down. And even more incredibly, this die has been seen on at least a dozen different merchants. So not only was it not rejected, but it was pressed into service and was pressed into service repeatedly. We figured it was either a practice die or die sinker just had a very bad day and they didn't want to waste the die steel. But that is one of the more amusing pieces of die cutting I have seen on a token. Now, April 1914 saw a complete redoing of the design. In that year, the Ingle system introduced a triangular logo, distinct triangular logo that they also got a design patent for, which you can see here on the right-hand side. It's much more elaborate, a little bit harder to copy, and also added some additional patent protection for the piece. The piece in the center here is a sample, and interestingly enough, this piece is made out of nickel-plated brass. Prior to 1914, almost all of the Ingle tokens were either copper or brass. I think they may have experimented with some other compositions, but it wasn't until 1914 that they introduced things like nickel and nickel-plated brass. And this is an example of a nickel-plated brass piece. Now, that said, the token denomination sizes were standardized throughout the period, starting all the way back with the copyrighted pieces. 1 cent token being 18 millimeters, all the way up to 30 millimeters for a 50 cent. The dollar was a 35 millimeter piece. Initially, the earliest $5 pieces were 30 millimeters, but then they standardized that to 35 millimeters. And then $10 pieces were also in the 35 millimeter diameter range. They figured that all the dollar denominated pieces would be 35 millimeters. None of these clashed with the size of contemporary US coins, where you would find some tokens, a 1 cent token, the exact same size as a dime, could be used in a meter. And that is something that has happened and it caused all kinds of grief. But you could also order, as with before, odd denominations. Now, they also did, not only did they do odd denominations, they did a few oddities as well in 1914. First and foremost is this interesting bimetallic piece from Mineral City, Ohio, the Markley Big Store Company. This is a copper with an aluminum center, and we presume that this planchet was actually made by the Dayton Stencil Works. Dayton Stencil Works was very well known for their bimetallic tokens, and it had actually been an innovator in that field since the very early 20th century. So it would make sense again here that Ingle would purchase blanks from them and then strike tokens out of those dies. What's particularly fascinating here is that bimetallic tokens were the most expensive of the tokens that you could get because of the cost to make the planchets. And so it's highly unusual to see a bimetallic token, especially in such a low denomination. These are extraordinarily rare pieces. The token below it is another oddity, and it's from our friend W.H. Young in Clover Lick. This token is made out of aluminum. Aluminum is not a metal that Ingle preferred to work in. Not quite too sure why. I suspect it's because the tokens got jammed in their machines a lot because of the lightness of the metal. So it didn't take off very well. But for some mysterious reason, Young wanted at least the 25-cent tokens made in aluminum. And this miserable dug piece, it's pitted, still has dirt incrustations in it, is the only known token from W.H. Young in any denomination. And aluminum is, again, extremely rare. Now, coal. Later on, after World War I, coal industry really took off with Scrip, and I'll talk about that in a second. But a lot of the coal companies started using Scrip, and they wanted to be distinctive with a lot of their Scrip. And the way they did that was they hired Ingle, initially Ingle, to do pictorial tokens, like this piece from West Virginia Pocahontas Coal in Leckie, West Virginia. This piece is not going to win any design awards. It has a rather crude rendering of a Native American chief on the reverse, and then on the obverse, it just crams in the name of the coal company in there, and just says patented, even though it is a 1914 patent date token. In fact, West Virginia Pocahontas ordered their tokens in 1918. Below is one of those weird denominations. This copper token from J.I. Good in Huntington, West Virginia, is good for a pint. And if memory serves, there's also a 1 quart denomination. Now, one of the great things about Ingle Scrip that's been kind of recent for the scholars is the brief access to the Ingle customer ledger. The story is in 2002, a token collector and researcher became friends with one of the VPs at Osborne Coin, and he inquired about Ingle tokens and things like that because he recalled that they had bought all that stock later on, and said, yes, we still have the customer ledger, and briefly let him have access to the ledger. That solved an awful lot of mysteries. A good deal of Ingle tokens, if you've noticed, don't actually name the town where they were used. And for the longest time, you had to pretty much make best guesses. Lloyd Wagaman produced a book in 1987 because he combed through Dunn and Bradstreet's and other business directories, trying his best to identify where these things were from. But that was pretty much a crapshoot. The Ingle register, for the most part, solved most of those mysteries, except for the very first 500 customers. For whatever reason, the very first customers of Ingle were not included in the ledger, the first 500 or so, the ones that ordered the very first of the 1909 patent script and the copyrighted pieces. When they started taking entries in their ledger, that was around 1910, and they started with the number 1. As you can see here, you'll see some customer numbers like 181. That would actually be later on. That's one of their later on in their customers. My personal specialty are the tokens and Scrip from the Mid-Atlantic states, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, DC, North Carolina, places like that. And I had done a study of the central Mid-Atlantic states, DC, Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia. Delaware didn't, no merchant from Delaware ordered any Ingle Scrip. And I did a little study on that. And there were a total of about 366 businesses that I was able to identify from those 4 states and the district, to include the district, that ordered from Ingle. And that allowed me an opportunity to take a look at what these businesses were and to see what kind of distribution these things had. And so I did a bit of a study on them. What's really neat about this is, in the case of the Ingle Register, you could actually see where the salesman went. The very first sales, they had people on the ground. In fact, it was Edwin Ingle himself would go traveling and trying to sell his product to stores all around the region. It was later on that they got more of a sales force, and they could scatter across the entire country. And then there were, of course, mail orders. That confidential list of supplies, for instance, would be a mail order form, and you could write in an order. But that was kind of fascinating. But what's really interesting is trying to figure out what kind of business used Ingle Scrip. And there was a definite shift after World War I. As you can see here, from 1909 to 1916, the primary users, by far the primary users of Ingle Scrip, were grocers and general merchants, dry goods stores. Those would be the blue and the red. The occasional food service restaurant or a bar ordered a couple. There were even a couple of mills, lumber mills that wanted some. And starting in 1913, a handful of coal mines were ordered Scrip. One in 1913 and then three in 1915. World War I came, and as you can see, there is just an absolute drop in sales in this region. I'm not sure if that happened across the entire nation. I strongly suspect that that was a function of war material becoming much more important, and since brass in particular for bullets becoming much more of a strategic metal, that reduced the Ingle's ability to produce tokens in that period. After the war, there was a coal boom. And for whatever reason, the Ingle business saw an opportunity in coal mines and made a particular effort to go out and drum up business from them. And as you can see, in 1918, they were particularly successful. 32 businesses just from West Virginia and Virginia, mostly West Virginia, ordered them. And in 1919, it was almost exclusively West Virginia that ordered, West Virginia coal mines that ordered the Scrip. From there, the Ingle brothers saw that there was a gold mine in selling Scrip to coal mines. Previously, coal mines used things like punch cards and paper script and a lot of similar accounting practices. They were also rife with abuse, especially given the somewhat captive nature of the residents and the employees at a remote coal camp deep in the mountains. But in June of 1919, presumably to focus on that coal mining business, the Ingle system reorganized as Insurance Credit System, or ICS. They used a similar triangular logo, except it just said Insurance Credit System. And there, they almost exclusively marketed to coal mines, iron mines and iron foundries and things like that. Some lumber mills. It was much more focused on industrial businesses rather than retail stores. Now, in 1920, Wiley W. Osborne entered the market. As Ingle's success and then also the insurance credit system's success took notice, that invited some competitors. And the first and foremost of these was Osborne Register Company out of Cincinnati. Osborne Register, also known as Orco, became the major player in Scrip. They issued Scrip well into the 1950s in several different designs, and they continue to this day, and they are still in business as Osborne Coin. Today, they focus primarily on high security casino tokens but also things like marketing medals and medallions and things like that, challenge coins. It's the high security casino chip business where they make most of their money. And it's also the reason why access to their records nowadays is a little on the limited side for scholars, because they treat the facility pretty much like a mint. And when you're producing a casino token for good for $10,000, you can see why. Now, Osborne grew, and in April 1925, he bought out the insurance credit system and all of their supplies, their dies, and the previous Ingle system dies. What was really interesting is the insurance credit system tokens were the exact same size as the Ingle tokens and could be used in these registers. Osborne would continue to use ICS dies until they could finally get all of those accounts on the Osborne register, on the Osborne account books, and stop producing insurance credit. Meanwhile, another company sprung up also in Ohio, and that would be the Ingle Shearlow Company out of by Edwin H. and Jerry H. Shearlow. After insurance credit was bought by Osborne, Edwin Ingle continued on, partnered with Jerry Shearlow, and they became the primary competitor to Orco. They produced tokens well into the 1950s. They had something that they called a master metal script, and it would say patented master metal script. Osborne produced a very special, huge, all metal recording register. It's believed Ingle Shearlow did the same. I've seen Osborne registers. I haven't seen an Ingle Shearlow one though. Interestingly enough, our old friends Dayton Stencil's works took an interest in all this, and in the late 1920s they bought Ingle Shearlow, but they also bought the name to the company. And starting in 1927, any Ingle Shearlow or master metal script that you find was actually struck by the Dayton Stencil Works, and I believe they are also still in business. Dayton Stencil Work preferred to do things using a brand name like Ingle Shearlow. And below here are some three extremely rare items. Token dies are in their own right not all that rare, but ones from System Script are. The one on the left there from Panther Coal Company is a pictorial token from Buchanan, Virginia. And that was, I believe, issued by Ingle Shearlow. The middle one is definitely Master Metal Script, and that's from the Jewel Ridge Coal Company, Jewel Ridge, Virginia. And then that last one is probably the rarest. That is an Orco reverse die, good for $1, and it is from the Type 3 class, which the Type 3 design, which was used from 1930 to 1938. And these are some examples from those companies. Token on the left is a typical insurance credit system token from Splash Dam Coal. Second to that one is from Camp Manufacturing Company out of Franklin, Virginia. It was at one time one of the largest lumber operations in the United States. And they had essentially a factory town down in Franklin. And they issued a whole series of tokens for many, many years at various different facilities. This particular one is nice because it has a date on it in 1941. Dayton Stencil did not necessarily issue an awful lot of tokens in their name, but they did issue an advertising token, and it's a bimetallic piece, such as this one right here. And then last but not least, Ingle Shearlow also used sales agents. Gail W. Riggs of Beckley, West Virginia was particularly well placed. Beckley is in the center of, in the heart of Appalachian coal, and they sold, and you could buy metal script through Riggs's business. And he went around to an awful lot of the coal mines and coal camps that were in and around Raleigh County and other nearby counties, Fayette County, in some of the Kanawha and some of the other counties in West Virginia. And in fact, during the 1960s and 1970s, one of those coal mines became the Beckley Exhibition Coal Mine. And you can go there to this day and take tours inside what was a working coal mine right in the heart of Beckley. And in the 60s and 70s, they don't know if they hired Dayton Stencil or someone else to produce them, but a series of tokens that say Beckley Exhibition Coal Mine on one side, and then the standard Ingle Shearlow reverse on the other was produced. And these were used as teaching aids back in the 60s and 70s. And it's kind of a neat little way of bringing that all around. Here's the thing with Scrip. After World War II, the heyday for Scrip was basically 1918 to about World War II. After World War II and the post-war prosperity, automobile technology, automobiles becoming more and more accessible, roads becoming more and more paved in rural areas, the birth of the Eisenhower interstate system and things like that, as well as the start of the collapse of the coal industry. This was the very beginning of it. Scrip use dwindled. In addition, more and more people complained and the abuses of the company store system started to come to the fore. And a lot of states started to outlaw company stores. Not all of them, but a few were very well known for predatory practices, overcharging their employees for goods, basically keeping them in hawk the entire time they were employed. There is a case of a coal mine in Shalmar, Maryland, where the company officers would visit some of their employees at night, knock on their doors and say, hey, you haven't been visiting the company store recently. That's what our books show. Maybe a good idea if you did your shopping there rather than go into nearby Oakland, which is the county seat there. And it is no surprise that that coal mine went out of business in the early 1950s. Scrip started to be outlawed in many states. West Virginia was the last of the holdouts there. Scrip is known to have been used there at least through the 1960s, possibly into the 1970s. And that really brought about the end of the era of system Scrip. But system Scrip as a whole all began with a grocery store in downtown Dayton, Ohio, back in 1908. And that is the history of the Ingle system. And any questions?
All right. Thank you, Eric. We'll open it up for questions. You can enter them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Eric, have you published at all on this topic?
I have indeed. I co-authored an article with my very good friend Dave Shankman. It was actually a supplement to the TAMS journal, just on the Scrip manufacturers located in Ohio. And I also wrote a small book on Ingle system Scrip from the Mid-Atlantic states. It's a personal favorite topic of mine.
I think we had a Newman portal user a couple years ago that randomly asked about an Ingle token, which I forwarded to you, I believe.
Yep. Yep. And thankfully, because of the Ingle ledger, I was able to tell you right away when they even ordered it, when that particular, where that merchant was located, and when they ordered it.
Nice. All right. All right, a question came in. What do you know about why a triangle was used as the logo?
Well, that's a very good question. I have no idea. It was just their preference. I'm guessing it was easy to design. I wish I knew more, but unfortunately, Mr. Ingle never wrote down why he wanted to use a triangular logo, either for Ingle or for Insurance Credit System, as you can see in the
Sure.
left hand.
And next question, what about Scrip from Colwood, West Virginia?
Colwood, yeah, the Rocket Boys. I don't know. I know that Olga Cole and Carter Cole issued Scrip from there. Some of it is common, some of it is rare. I know that because of that movie and the book by Homer Hickam, Colwood material has been particularly popular. I don't immediately recall if what the script makers were, but I can tell you that Olga Cole and Carter Cole issued tokens from there, and I believe one of those was the company that Homer Hickam had experience with.
Yeah. And, next question or comment. Delco used a triangle logo also and was a neighbor in downtown Dayton in the same time frame.
Yeah, yeah, it might be a Dayton thing.
Sure. Next question. What are good sources to purchase these?
I have had some very good luck getting them off of eBay.
Mhm.
I've made some actually very good friends in eBay. My friend Doug Tolley out of Beckley is a big time coal script dealer, and he's one of the nicest gentlemen I've ever met. Coal script collectors are everywhere, and in fact, the National Script Collectors Association is a very good resource. They hold 2 shows a year. One of them is in West Virginia, and usually they have the other one in Kentucky, though that's not always the case. I try to make the Beckley show. It's a very small but very passionate group of people. At the show, it's a handful of dealers, but this is their bread and butter, are coal, mostly coal tokens. And it's a great place to make friends, have a good time, visit an actual coal mine if you want, and you can and do some horse trading. I have had luck on eBay. Sometimes, believe it or not, if you go prowling some of the more remote antique malls and things like that, you can find some. Generally, what you're going to find there, I'd have to say about 99% of the time, is going to be overpriced, very common stuff. So if you want the real rare material, you kind of have to do some hunting and seeking for that.
And what are the price ranges on this kind of material?
Well, it really depends. The really common stuff you can get for $1, $2, $3. You can find in coin dealer junk boxes for even 25 cents to $1. A typical, I would say, R5, R6, or 8, R7 would be a $5 to $25 piece. Once you get up to R8 and higher, R10 being rarest, that's where things get a little bit crazier. I have seen some Kentucky coal script. Kentucky is really hot right at the moment. I've seen some of that regularly break the $1,000 barrier for a particularly rare piece. But most of the very rare ones will be in the $100 to $500 range, depending on what it is.
All right, and next question, do you know of any contemporary references to script use in books of fiction from back in the day? Do they feature in any mysteries?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't. The most famous thing that I can think of right offhand is, of course, the song 16 Tons. And what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. That's probably the most famous reference to company stores and the company store system. As far as script itself, I cannot immediately think of any. That said, I am almost certain that there's a lot of regional literature, in particular from Appalachia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and certainly West Virginia, that makes mention of coal script. I just can't think of any right offhand.
Yeah, I would think some of the historical fiction writers, would be tuned into details like that. So
exactly, a lot of the local, a lot of local fiction writers I have found that tried to pull in local things like this into their works. I'm just not well versed enough in it to really comment on it, unfortunately.
And in terms of research resources, what's good? I would think Token Catalog has a pretty good listing of these.
Token Catalog does have a pretty good listing. Token Catalog is also a very good place for specifically Ingle system information, because I know that Richard Griever has worked closely with the person who has that register in identifying stuff. But a lot of the other research material, believe it or not, business directories, if you can find them, things like Google Books, a lot of the business directories show up there. I have some business directories. I actively seek them out. Other things like the Mines Handbook and some other coal books. 20,000 coal company stores by Dodrell is a must-have.
Yeah.
And absolutely the Edkins catalog of coal script, which you get through the National Script Collectors Association.
Okay.
Those are the single best references that you can get. Some of the state references will also have it. Like I can personally vouch for the Virginia Token Book. That has coal script in it as well. But if you're going to be on the ground with shoe leather the ground type thing, nothing really beats a good coal directory, the Keystone Coal Directory or a business directory, and just really getting on the horn and calling some people.
Yeah.
Some of these stores, the buildings still exist, and some of the current owners will have a lot of that literature.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the rarity ratings, I assume these are like in the state token guides.
Yeah, the rarity ratings that I cited are out of Edkins, which is usually considered the standard.
Okay.
Basically, R10 is the rarest. That's one, maybe two known. The main thing is that the mintages of these things are nothing like U.S. coins. There are cases of Ingle Shearlow script, for instance. Mintage records are known because the Ingle Shearlow records are available. And there are mintages of maybe 100 of a particular denomination or 300 of another denomination, whereas others, maybe 5,000 or 10,000 would be considered a fairly large mintage figure for a particular denomination.
Yeah. All right, that's a good question. How did stores retire their tokens?
That's a great question. They did. In some cases, they just said, bring them on in, we'll cash them out. And if you didn't, too bad, so sad. There are a couple of cases, and I'll give you one story that I particularly like. It comes from a coal company, Davis Coal and Coke out of Kempton, West Virginia / Maryland. This is a great case of coal mines being a little on the shady side. The coal field itself, the coal mine, the company town itself, even the tipple, were all located in Garrett County, Maryland. But the company store, the post office, and the maintenance shop were located, no joke, 25 feet over the state line in Preston County, West Virginia. And the tokens themselves say Kempton, West Virginia on them, even though everything in mine related is in Maryland. Maryland outlawed company stores. So to get around this, that was a Davis Coal and Coke solution. And they did it through I don't want to say a front company, but it was a company called Buxton and Land Street. In 1950, unannounced, the Davis Coal and Coke decided that they were going to shut down their Kempton operations. They shut the mines down, gave 2 weeks notice to the employees and residents, and said they have exactly that amount of time to bring in their scrip to the Buxton and Land Street store to get paid out. Otherwise, you're out of luck. A lot of people did. What Buxton and Land Street did after that was very interesting. They sealed up the mines. And part of that, they had a ventilation shaft, and it was about 150, 200 meter deep ventilation shaft. They dumped all the scrip down that shaft and then filled the shaft with tailings.
Oh my.
So it's down at the bottom there.
Wow.
There was another coal company in southwestern Virginia that used aluminum tokens, and they encased them in concrete. And they were found later on, and some of these things are heavily pitted. They look awful, and that's because the intrepid collector found the concrete and chiseled them out.
Wow.
That's how they did it. If it was paper script, they just burned it. But a lot of times they destroyed it in any way they could. And
Sure.
For a coal mine, it was pretty easy. You find an old adit, throw it down the adit, seal it up, you're done.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the Carson City Mint. They just dug a hole and threw them in the ground. It was the easiest way to get rid of the dies.
Yeah, exactly.
This reminds me that we do have Ingle Shearlow records on Newman Portal that were loaned to us by Billy Campbell. So
That's
it's
a
got
valuable resource in its own right.
yeah, a lot of correspondence between Ingle Shearlow and the issuing companies. So just so people are aware of that. Next question, are any price guides available?
Not so much price guides, but rarity guides. For coal scrip, the Edkins catalog is the gold standard there. And that would be this book. This is the gold standard. It comes in 2 volumes. One is every state but West Virginia, and the second volume is only West Virginia. West Virginia has so much scrip it warranted its own volume. Thousands upon thousands of varieties just from that one state. And West Virginia only has 55 counties in it. So that is fascinating in its own right. But yeah, what this will do, this will help you identify the token, the manufacturer, and the rarity. But not so much prices. You're going to have a very hard time finding a pure price guide when it comes to tokens. In a lot of cases, the market is so rarefied, it's usually just a handful of people setting the prices. And if it's a very rare piece of scrip, like for instance, some of these Kentucky pieces, if you have 2 very well-heeled collectors that really want it, a token that you would normally guess would be 100, 150 bucks is soon, hammering for 1,700.
Wow.
However, say 2 or 3 more come down are discovered later on, and that other guy gets his for say $1,000, then goes from 1,700 to 1,000, and then say 3, 4, 5, or 6 more show up, and they sell for 20 bucks. So what price is it? Is it 20 bucks? Is it 1,500? What is it? So a lot of token collectors are very and catalogers are very reticent about putting prices to them. Rarities is a little less fraught with danger in that regard. Yeah. And that's an analogy that I think is a great analogy that I learned from my great friend Dave Schenkman.
So it sounds like at the high end, these things are pretty thinly traded.
Yes, there are some cases where if there's only one token that's known, it shows up for sale. That's the last time you'll see it. So yeah, I mean, it's not like something like I hate to say an $1804, but an $1804 shows up on the market on a fairly regular basis. Yeah. Granted, it fetches some eye-popping numbers, but there's also more of them. That W.H. Young token that I got, it's the only one known, but I'm not going to be able to get anything like an $1804 price for it. Yeah. But I'm not going to want to because I have the man's register.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, so these were meant to be used and redeemed, and so
exactly
they don't exist.
Exactly, they were not given care like you would, say, a proof coin today, right. or something like a silver dollar back in the day. Yeah.
All right, very good. I think that's it for the questions. We'll leave it open just another minute, just in case there are any last minute questions. But thanks for being on today. The video from all events at NNP Symposium will be available in 2 to 3 weeks. We will send an email to all the registrants with the details of where to access the video. So one last question here. Do the dies for any of these tokens exist such that another 100 could be ordered?
Interestingly enough, yes. If the company was still in business and they still had the dies, you could do reorders and they would use the existing dies. These companies maintained a die library, basically a big vault full of these things. And so they were, since that was basically their intellectual property, their property, they kept pretty close track of them. It's when the companies got sold that would be a little less clear. For instance, I have 3. Technically, I shouldn't have them because they should have stayed with their companies, but somehow a couple of them got out. Some of them were sold legitimately. Don't know. I don't know what happened there. Counterfeiting is not as big a problem as you would think it might be, mostly because of the very highly rarefied nature of this market, but also it's kind of hard to strike the tokens, and there are a few of us dedicated collectors, myself included, who do everything in our power to acquire the dyes, to get them out of circulation, to prevent them from being used for nefarious purposes. But as far as reorders, like official reorders, yes, you could do that. That's easily done.
All right. All right, very good. I think that'll wrap it up. Eric, thanks so much for being on today.
All right, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, and we do have additional presentations tomorrow, and we'll see everyone then. All right, thanks a lot, Eric.
All right, thank you. All right, good night.